Horizon Channel, Reacts, and this is England's South Sea Bubble, The Sharp Mind of John Blunt, Extra History Part 1 by the channel Extra Credits. Yes, I think this is, story about that one company, right? In which basically they had the right to a certain trade route, right? And in that, basically, everybody just thought that, oh, they have exclusive right to certain trade routes, so they must be bringing lots of, I guess, goods and doing lots of business. So their stock price basically just got inflated because in people's eyes, basically, they were worth a lot until they realized they're not doing shit and it just all collapsed, right? I think this is that. But yeah, it's going to be fun watching this. When Robert Harley steps in as England's new Chancellor of the Exchequer, he discovered that not only is the government deeply in debt, but no one quite knows quite how much debt it owes. But yeah, because of wars and shit, right, with the France and things. Because vicious political infighting between the Tory and Whig political parties made it difficult to pass new tax laws, Harley turned to a private financier named John Blunt to help find enough money for England to keep up with its expenses for the year. Using Harley's government resources, Blunt instigated a series of get-rich schemes that drove artificial demand for unsustainable land and lottery investment with tremendous short-term gains. Before the year was done, Blunt had successfully covered the shortfall for the government that year, albeit at the cost of driving England's already outrageous debt even higher. Basically, this was a scam, right? Let's just call it what it is. It was a damn scam, right? Just because government is involved and you I guess sugar coated with lots of big talk, it doesn't change the fact that it was a scam in the end. They sold something that didn't existed, and it just basically rose the debt even higher. So yeah, let's do this one.
Welcome to the fourth installment of Extra History. This time it's going to be a daring tale of high seas, adventure, and romance. Nah, I'm just kidding. This is going to be all about finance and...
What do you mean by fourth installment? This is the fourth series ever they covered. I guess it's from 2015, so it's possible.
Economics. First off, I just want to say, I think it's amazing that we get to do this episode. Each month, the Patreon subscribers vote on what the next topic is going to be, and last month we just sort of threw in the South Seas Company topic on a lark. It's important, and it's relevant, but we figured there's no way that it would win out against things like the life of Caesar or the Spanish Inquisition. But delightfully, we were wrong. And that's one of the things that I love about doing this series.
Yeah, but there's so many big channels out there, right? That basically covered all that. Caesar, Roman, and everything. South Sea Bubble, I haven't come across many videos on that. Very popular and good videos, so it's understandable.
Everything from the YouTube comments to the episode suggestions and the votes from the Patreon supporters reflect not the nihilistic internet that people always talk about, but rather a genuine curiosity and a love of history. I desperately want to cover the campaigns of Caesar and dig into the truth about the Spanish Inquisition too, of course, but I think it's pretty awesome that we have an audience that's also interested in something as obscure and esoteric as the South Seas Bubble. So
I don't think he ever did the Caesar video, right? I don't think there's any Caesar video. Because I think I've checked how many series are there from this channel. I don't think I found a Caesar one. There's Justinian one, sure. There is Punic Wars. Pretty sure there's some Rome series, but not particular Caesar series.
So, what is the South Seas Bubble? It is perhaps some of the wildest financial chicanery of the 18th century. And why are we covering it? Well, because it has a lot of parallels with some of the events of the last few years. It gloriously highlights the importance and value of financial institutions, while also serving as a warning about the incredible...
Wait a minute, this video is from 2015. What happened before that? That reflects that. Wait a minute, I don't remember anything.
...danger of invented wealth. But before we can talk about the South Seas Bubble, we have to talk about the South Seas Company.
Because 2008, I understand that bubble burst and, economic collapse. I know that, but this is from 2015. What happened around then?
And before we can talk about the South Seas Company, we have to talk about Great Britain in the early 1700s. First off, there was no Great Britain in the very early 1700s, because until the Act of Union in 1707, England and Scotland were two different countries. But since that's right in the middle of the story that we're about to tell, I'm just going to refer to England as Great Britain throughout, if that's okay. And the first thing to know about our Great Britain is the fact...
Yeah, I think all the countries in the Great Britain also consider England as Great Britain.
...that in the late 17th and early 18th century, it pretty much could not get enough of being at war. Not only did the English go through a major civil war in the 17th century, which I am sure we're going to cover someday, but then they just continued to fight pretty much everybody in Europe for the next 100 years. So with that in mind, I'm just going to start us off in 1710 with a guy named Robert Harley. August of 1710 looks like it's going to be a great month for Mr. Harley. Through a bunch of political wrangling, he's just gotten himself appointed Chancellor of the Exchequer, a position that's basically the same as the Secretary of the Treasury in the US. He's been out of power for a while, but by gum, he's gotten himself back in it now. He's thinking everything is gonna be great. Then he looks at Britain's balance sheet. In one column is the £5,000 still remaining in the government treasury, and in the other column is a hastily scrawled note saying somewhere roughly probably around £9 million in big red ink. To give you an idea of just how big this debt is, the
5,000 versus 9 million. I don't think we need to see the inflation to know that's bad, right? Because the difference alone tells you how much of a fucking debt they were.
Current Chancellor of the Exchequer announced that a payment toward this consolidated debt will be made on February 1st of 2015.
Whoa.
That red ink is still being paid down today, 300 years later. So with that in mind, you can pretty much imagine the freakout that Harley had when he realized just how impossible his job was. His first task was just to keep the government afloat through the end of the year. Unfortunately, there were a few hurdles between him and doing that. First, there was the problem of government accounting. At the time, Britain had no unified budget, so while everybody knew that they were in debt, until Harley did a thorough investigation, no one quite knew exactly how in debt they were. This meant that no real preparation had been done, and since every government department had its own budget and carried its own debts, even after doing a deep dive on the books, even Harley could only give a ballpark estimate of how much debt they really had to tackle. Second problem, the House of Commons was a deeply partisan two-party body. For the last few years, the Parliament had been controlled by the Liberal Whigs, with the Conservative Tory minority routinely blocking any legislation from the opposite side of the House. Well, now the Tories had come into power, and you better believe the Whig minority was going to do the same thing to them. Of course, in response, the Tories were busy calling for the impeachment of members of the previous Whig government, and
that's the fucked up thing, right? When two parties basically dominate things, they can oppose each other's decision and no progress can be ever made, I guess.
all of this just made raising taxes a near impossibility. With taxation as a revenue stream cut off, Harley turned to the next viable option to keep the government running, the Bank of England. The Bank of England, though, was created by the Whigs, and was a Whig-controlled institution. In fact, this is the beginning of the age of central banking. The Bank of England was really the first institution of its kind, a bank specifically designed to lend money to the government and make sure the government remained solvent. But since most of the board members of the Bank of England were Whigs, and Harley was a Tory, the bank was none too quick to help the government out. This left only foreign creditors as a possible source of revenue for the government, but given how—
Damn, even with the bank, there was a political issue. Holy shit, that was just fucked up. Whigs control the central bank. I mean, I get it, this is the early times, but still, I mean, I guess over the time they probably, corrected that issue, right? Because political affiliation with the central bank could be really problematic.
How deeply in debt the government already was, and how many people it was still fighting, outside credit wasn't really available. So, with no other options left to him, Harley turned to less orthodox sources, namely John Blunt of the Hollow Sword Blade Company. Despite Blunt being an odd name for one of the fellows in charge of a company which held the monopoly on making fine swords, our Mr. Blunt possessed a sharp financial mind and very few, if any, scruples. He saw the government's critical financial state not as some great national crisis, but rather an opportunity to make money. Lots and lots of money. But he couldn't just sell the government rapiers. No, Blunt needed cold, hard cash. So he dreamed up a scheme so convoluted it's kind of hard to even describe, but I'm going to give it my best shot. The real estate market in Ireland was currently up for grabs, as the British government had just confiscated large amounts of Catholic land. Blunt wanted the Hollow Sword Blade Company to buy as much as it could, as cheaply as possible. Unfortunately, the Hollow Sword Blade Company didn't quite have the capital to do that, so they needed to raise some money in a hurry. Normally, you would do this just by selling stock in the company, but Blunt had a much more intricate plan. He offered to trade stock in the Hollow Sword Blade Company for army debentures at under market value to anyone who was willing to make the swap. Now, army debentures were a form of government debt. Basically, they were a promissory note that the army issued when it couldn't afford to, actually pay for things. The problem was, you can't exactly repossess the army's car, so those promissory notes aren't actually backed by anything, making them very hard for people to collect on, which in turn made them nearly worthless. Okay, so at this point, you're probably.
Yeah, but isn't it you don't need a collateral if the party that basically you're giving it to has some form of trust, like it's an army, it's the England army, right? It's not just some company or some party that's just gonna walk away and not give you anything. It's the army. It's basically the central government. It's army, I guess. So you're not gonna trust the army? Come on. Maybe not now, but in the future they will pay eventually, because they are literally the England government. They are England army. I don't know.
Probably confused. How's the Hollow Sword Blade Company gonna make money by swapping shares in their company at under market value for army debt that most people are just looking to get rid of anyway? Well, Blunt realized that an offer this good was going to entice a lot of people into taking him up on it, thereby massively inflating the demand for, and thus the price of, army debentures. So he very quietly went out ahead of time and had the company quietly buy up as many army debentures as it possibly could before announcing their offer to swap debentures for company shares. That way, when they announced their offer, the value of all the debentures they picked up would go through the roof. On top of that, because the land he was aiming to buy was government held, he could trade the government debt for the land directly at whatever value he'd driven the debt to. This tangly web of financial magic ended up getting him not only the £200,000 he needed to buy land in Ireland, but also another £20,000, which he politely loaned to the government at a very low rate. Now, what Blunt and the Hollow Sword Blade Company did here is certainly illegal today, and probably was illegal back then.
It's basically scam, man. He's basically, inflating prices by doing certain actions, so citizens would pay more. He's basically, simplistic term, just, grabbing money from the civilians any means necessary just to pay for a debt in the end, I guess. So it's a scam in the end, right? If you really peel it through, it's a scam. Scams like this happens a lot, right? In the stock market and everywhere. But that's for temporary purposes. If you, inflate prices like that and, take money from that, but eventually, if you gain enough capital and make enough money to pay things back, I guess no harm, no foul, right? But basically, that's understandable. But if you fail on that, your scam comes out and, basically, that's just problem.
Too. In fact, there was even a court ruling against the company, but since they were now busy lending the government money, no action was ever taken against them. After all, when you're busy lending money to the government, who exactly is going to punish you for bending the law? Which is, of course, what got Blunt and Harley together in the first place.
That's basically, stock market, right? Current stock market, in 2008, basically bankers fucked up, and they are the one who got paid in the end too, by the civilian tax money. So that basically is stock market in nutshell. They have lots of, I guess, there are people, in Congress, basically, in their pocket, right? What are they called? Whatever, you pay certain people, lobbyists, right? There are lots of lobbyists. This is similar.
Blunt was helping the government find funds, and Harley badly needed funds to be found, so it was high time they take tea. The Bank of England had been running a rather mediocre lottery for the government the last few years, and Harley decided that Blunt was just the man he needed to kick it up a notch. So he got the rights to administer the government lottery turned over to Blunt and his crew. And man, did Blunt do a bang-up job. In 4 days, he sold out all of the tickets, pocketing a tidy profit for himself in the process. He then followed it up with an unbelievably exorbitant lottery with tickets that cost thousands of dollars apiece by today's standards. And he sold out all of those too. The only problem was that part of the way he did this was by making sure that every ticket won something. At minimum, you were guaranteed to get at least 10% of the price of your ticket back in winnings, which is great for the gambler, but not so great for the government. The key, though, was that the government would pay out the winnings over the next decade rather than right away, bringing a much-needed influx of cash to the exchequer. So while, yes, this added still more long-term debt the government owed, it gave Harley the £300,000 he needed to see the government through the next few months.
Yeah.
But it's going to take way more than just lotteries to solve the larger looming debt crisis. So join us next time for the scheme that Harley and Blunt pulled together to tackle the long-term British debt.
Yeah, bubbles like this basically.
Scheme that will be called the South Seas Trading Company.
Yeah, bubbles like this, can be successful. It's a gamble, basically. Like, you can get short-term money by raising a debt over time. But with that money, if you pull through, do enough business and basically can back up all the debt, no harm, no foul, basically. But that rarely happens. Bubbles always burst like that. But yeah, basically John Blunt is like, Wolf of Wall Street type of thing. He has a, real mind how to, drive and take money from the economy, right? So basically just inflated prices here and there, right? Something has a money because people think something has a, real value because people think it has a value. He basically played that part and just took money from the people, right? I mean, it's illegal in a way, but if you don't, back it soon enough, right? If you don't make profit from that and back it soon enough, that's a bubble that will burst and everything falls apart, I guess. Right, well, that was England's South Sea bubble, the sharp mind of John Blunt. If you like my next one, like, subscribe, check out the Rick Sanity, there's a link in the description. Check out the cast of places and cards, and I'll see you next time.